They thought they had won when they changed the locks on my front door. What they didn't realize was that I had been preparing for this moment for 3 years, ever since Robert's first heart attack. My name is Catherine Walsh, and at 72, I have learned that love and strategy are not mutually exclusive. When I married Robert Harrison 15 years ago, I knew I was walking into a complicated family dynamic. His 3 adult children had never fully accepted their father's remarriage after their mother's death. I understood their grief and tried to bridge the gap with patience and genuine care. For over a decade, I believed we had found our rhythm. Robert was a successful real estate developer who had built his fortune from nothing. His children, Marcus, Diana, and James, had idealized their mother's memory, and I never tried to replace her. Instead, I carved out my own space, attending graduations and family gatherings with quiet dignity. I contributed to holidays, remembered birthdays, and offered support during difficult times. I thought we had mutual respect, if not deep affection. The first crack appeared during Robert's initial hospitalization 3 years ago. While I spent nights by his bedside coordinating with doctors, I noticed how his children would huddle together in hospital corridors, their conversations stopping when I approached. Diana, the eldest and a corporate lawyer, began asking pointed questions about Robert's medical decisions and financial arrangements. Marcus, a struggling artist who depended on his father's generosity, started making comments about family loyalty. James, who ran a construction business, began treating me with unprecedented coldness. Robert recovered, but something had shifted. During his recuperation, I overheard Diana discussing the need to protect their father's interests, expressing concern about my influence. The words stung, but I told myself it was natural worry. I convinced myself that once Robert was fully recovered, things would return to normal. Normal never came. Invitations to family gatherings became less frequent. When I did attend, conversations felt stilted. Diana began interrogating me about Robert's finances. Marcus made jokes about gold diggers, always with meaningful glances. The situation deteriorated when Robert had his second heart attack 18 months ago. This time, recovery was slower and more complicated. He developed mild cognitive issues that left him feeling vulnerable. During this period, his children's behavior became aggressive. Diana attended every doctor's appointment, positioning herself as primary contact. She arranged a family meeting with Robert's attorney, ostensibly to discuss estate planning. I should have seen the trap, but I was focused entirely on Robert's care. I failed to recognize that my devotion was being reframed as manipulation. The attorney meeting was my awakening. Diana arrived with documents painting me as a threat to Robert's well-being and financial security. She suggested his condition might be affecting his judgment, that he might be susceptible to undue influence. Marcus and James presented a united front that excluded me entirely. Robert, overwhelmed and tired, agreed to changes that effectively marginalized my position. I left that meeting shaken but newly alert. These people whom I had loved for 15 years were actively working to erase me. The realization was devastating but sparked something dormant. I had survived a difficult first marriage, raised children as a single mother, and built a successful career as a principal. I was not the helpless victim they thought I was. That night, I decided everything would change. I would not confront them directly or upset Robert, but I would quietly begin protecting myself. I contacted my own attorney, Sarah Chen, who specialized in elder law. When I explained my situation, she nodded with knowing recognition. She helped me understand my rights and advised on protection steps without creating immediate conflict. Over the following months, I documented everything. I kept detailed records of family interactions, noting dates and witnesses. I photographed important documents before they could disappear. I started recording interactions with the children, particularly when they made statements about my character. Sarah advised that one-party consent laws meant I could legally record conversations I participated in. Meanwhile, I maintained my role as Robert's devoted caregiver, while having private conversations about his wishes. During clearer moments, I asked him directly about his feelings regarding his children's behavior. These conversations were painful but necessary. Robert admitted noticing the tension and being troubled by his children's treatment of me. The most crucial conversation happened on a quiet Sunday morning 6 months before Robert's death. He was particularly sharp that day. I showed him documentation of what I had observed. Robert was shocked, then angry, then deeply sad. He realized his children's grief had twisted into something destructive. That day, Robert made important decisions. He insisted on meeting with a new attorney. He created a detailed estate plan, protecting me while providing for his children. Most importantly, he documented his mental competency and reasoning, creating an unshakable record. Robert's final heart attack came suddenly. I was with him when he collapsed and stayed through the hospital efforts. His children arrived within hours, and briefly, grief united us. Diana held my hand. Marcus brought coffee. James handled arrangements thoughtfully. I hoped Robert's death might heal our rifts. That hope lasted 4 days, until Diana appeared with a locksmith and eviction notice. Standing on what had been my porch for 15 years, watching strangers change my locks, I felt pure, focused rage. Diana informed me the house had been left to them jointly, that I had no right to remain there. I said nothing. I simply smiled and asked for 10 minutes to call a friend. Within 30 minutes, Sarah arrived with a process server and temporary restraining order, preventing disposal of Robert's property until proper probate. The locksmith provided me with a key, and Diana was informed she couldn't enter without permission or court supervision. The legal battle was exhausting, but I was prepared. Robert's new estate plan was ironclad, witnessed extensively. More importantly, I had recorded evidence of manipulation and elder abuse, including Diana coaching Marcus on what to tell Robert's doctor about my supposedly manipulative behavior. When Sarah played these recordings in court, the judge's expression shifted to obvious disgust. Within an hour, the children's challenge was withdrawn. They accepted Robert's will terms, keeping their inheritance but losing any control over mine. The financial victory was satisfying, but emotional costs were enormous. Any possibility of reconciliation was permanently destroyed. They viewed me as a manipulative outsider. I saw them as selfish people whose grief had turned them cruel. Both perspectives probably contained truth, but the gap was unbridgeable. The next morning, I woke up in my legally uncontestable house and realized I had no idea what to do with the rest of my life. For 3 years, I had focused entirely on survival. Now I faced the challenge of building a new life from the wreckage. I spent weeks in suspended animation, maintaining routines without purpose. Friends from my marriage had disappeared, either from awkwardness or influence from the children's version of events. I found myself more isolated than I had been in decades. The turning point came when I discovered letters Robert had written but never sent. Found in his desk, each was dated and sealed with my name. They spanned our entire marriage, revealing the depth of his love and his growing awareness of his children's hostility. In the final letter, dated 2 weeks before his death, Robert wrote about regrets and hopes for my future. He acknowledged that marrying him had cost me dearly, that his children's behavior had caused undeserved pain. But he also wrote about the joy I had brought his life, and his belief that I had strength to build something beautiful from whatever remained. Reading those letters, I understood that the woman Robert loved still existed inside me, buried under years of trying to please people determined not to be pleased. I had forgotten who I was before becoming a stepmother. Robert's letters reminded me of interests, dreams, and capabilities set aside for family harmony never achieved. Later that day, I made calls that would reshape my life. I contacted my old school district to volunteer mentoring new principals. I reached out to literacy organizations needing experienced educators. I investigated travel programs and continuing education. For the first time in years, I made plans about what I wanted, not what others expected. I also decided to reach out to Robert's children one final time. I wrote each a letter expressing genuine sorrow that we couldn't support each other through shared loss. I acknowledged my presence had been painful, while making clear I wouldn't apologize for loving their father or protecting myself. Diana never responded. Marcus sent a brief formal note. James surprised me by calling weeks later. Our conversation was awkward, but he expressed some regret about how things unfolded. He recognized I had genuinely cared for their father. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was acknowledgement of shared humanity. 6 months later, I decided to sell the house. Living there had become about proving a point rather than creating a home. I found a charming cottage with a garden requiring attention. The sale, combined with my inheritance, gave me unprecedented financial security. Downsizing forced me to confront 15 years of accumulated possessions. I kept photographs from happy times, donated Robert's belongings to charity, and created a memory book focusing on genuine love rather than final conflicts. Settling into my new home, I understood that victory over Robert's children had been less important than victory over my own self-doubt. For too long, I had accepted their narrative that I was an outsider. The legal battle forced me to recognize that my love for Robert had been real and valuable, regardless of their opinions. The next morning in my new kitchen, I received a call from Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, director of a nonprofit supporting older adults facing family estrangement. She had heard about my case and suggested my experience might help others in similar situations. The idea both intrigued and terrified me. Dr. Morrison invited me to observe a support group meeting. Listening to their stories, I felt sad recognition. The details differed, but underlying dynamics were remarkably similar. I could see ways my experience might help others facing similar challenges. I accepted the volunteer position. My role involved providing peer support to older adults facing family estrangement, helping them understand legal rights and sharing survival strategies. Training was intellectually stimulating, and I discovered insights that could genuinely help others. 6 months into volunteer work, James called requesting to meet. At coffee, he looked older than his years. He acknowledged difficult times and expressed regret about how things unfolded. He admitted allowing Diana to lead their campaign partly from loyalty, partly because challenging her was difficult. He had come to realize their actions were more about grief and fear than real threats I posed. James revealed Diana was dealing with her own regrets, though too proud to reach out directly. Marcus was seeing a therapist to work through family dynamics. James asked about possible reconciliation, perhaps civility and respect if not closeness. I appreciated his honesty and courage. I told him I harbored no desire for continued conflict but couldn't pretend the past hadn't happened. Perhaps we could hope for mutual respect and civil speech if paths crossed. Later that day, I realized James's visit provided closure I hadn't known I needed. His acknowledgement didn't erase pain but confirmed my perceptions had been accurate. More importantly, it freed me from any lingering need to prove my worth. Validation came not from winning their approval but from knowing I had conducted myself with dignity. That evening, I called Dr. Morrison about expanding my role. I proposed developing workshops for older adults targeted by family members, focusing on early recognition of manipulation and self-protection strategies. The idea excited her, and we began planning comprehensive programs. The next morning brought an unexpected gift, a handwritten letter from Mrs. Chen, an 81-year-old woman I had helped defend against her daughter's attempt to have her declared incompetent. Using strategies I had shared, Mrs. Chen successfully maintained her independence. Her letter thanked me for helping her find strength to fight and showing her that age didn't mean powerlessness. Reading Mrs. Chen's letter, I understood. My ordeal hadn't been meaningless suffering. The strategies, strength, and insights I had gained were serving purposes beyond my own survival. I was helping other older adults recognize their worth and fight for dignity in ways I never could have imagined. Later, my daughter Sarah called, having followed my volunteer work with pride. She was researching elder abuse prevention and considering a career change to specialize in this area. She credited our conversations with opening her eyes to the scope of family-based elder abuse. The idea that my struggle might inspire my daughter to help others felt like profound validation. That evening, tending my garden that had become both therapy and joy, I reflected on the journey that brought me here. 3 years ago, I had been desperately trying to maintain peace in a family that viewed me as an intruder. I had sacrificed my identity, pursuing acceptance that was never coming. The woman I had become was fundamentally different. I no longer needed external validation to know my worth. I had learned to set and maintain boundaries regardless of others' reactions. I had discovered that sometimes the most loving thing is refusing to enable destructive behavior, even if that means accepting permanent estrangement. Most importantly, I had transformed pain into purpose. The next morning, I woke feeling something I hadn't experienced in years: excitement about the day ahead. My calendar was filled with activities I had chosen because they brought joy or served purposes I believed in. Standing in my kitchen making coffee, I thought about Robert and his unsent letters. He had believed I had strength to build something beautiful from whatever remained. Looking at the life I was creating, I realized he had been right. I had not just survived the destruction of the family I tried to build with his children. I had used that destruction as foundation for something entirely new and infinitely more authentic. The woman locked out of her home 3 years ago would barely recognize who I had become. That woman focused on earning love from people who had decided she was unworthy. The woman I was now understood that the most important relationship was with myself, and self-respect was not negotiable. Preparing to leave for my first appointment, I paused at the mirror and smiled at my reflection. The face showed lines of a woman who had lived through difficulty and emerged stronger. The eyes held confidence and peace I had never seen before. I had learned to be my own protector, advocate, and source of validation. My quiet victory was not about defeating Robert's children or winning the legal battle. My victory was refusing to let their rejection define my worth, building a life reflecting my values rather than their expectations, and finding ways to use pain as strength for others facing similar challenges. I had learned that sometimes the most powerful form of revenge is simply living well. Walking out into a morning filled with possibilities, I realized that for the first time in years, I was genuinely looking forward to whatever came next. The future was mine to create, and I intended to make it extraordinary.